So we have been in a series for the past couple of weeks called Connected. And through this series, we've been actually walking through John chapter 15. And just a big overview, this chapter is literally about being connected to Jesus. Thus the title of the series. Makes sense. And in the first week, we talked about that when we're connected to Jesus, we are connected to his power. In the second week, we said if you're connected into Jesus, you are connected into the peace that comes from the promise of what it is to be connected to him. Last week, we talked about being connected to Jesus' love and the fact that his love is in you when you're connected to him, but it doesn't stop at you. It actually flows outward. And so it's been a very positive, encouraging series, kind of like K-Love, unless it's Pledge Week, and that's not positive and encouraging, but that's a whole other deal. Yeah, so it's been good. It's been solid, got uplifting things. And so I figured I'd come in today and I'd really squash that and we'd talk about persecution instead. Good? Yeah, I know. You were like, that's what I came to hear today. I got out of the bed this morning going, we're going to talk about persecution. That's right, yes. That's just where it falls. That's what Jesus talks about directly after talking about love. Now, I don't think that's an accident, but it is where it falls. And I feel you. You're probably going, we're going to talk about persecution. Great. I get it. When we split up this series and we said, you got these verses, you got these verses, I got 18 through 21. I read them and I went, so who wants to trade? I'll even throw in a snack pack with it. What's happening here? Now, to be honest with you, this is actually something I'm quite passionate about today. Passionate to the point to where instead of bringing a whole manuscript up here, it's usually what I do, whole word for word. I may not say it word for word, but it's there and it makes me feel safe and secure. Today, I've actually only got one sheet that's up there and it's just got some outlines because I want to make sure I left room for God to speak in this more than just me speaking. Not that he doesn't normally speak, but I just want to make sure I left room for it today. So we're going to dive into John chapter 15, and hopefully as we talk, if you'll give me just your attention for just a little while, I promise we're going to talk about what persecution is, what it isn't, and why it's vitally important to believers. So we're going to jump into John chapter 15, verses 18 through 21. It says, if the world hates you, understand that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. However, because you are not of the world, but because I have chosen you out of it, the world hates you. Remember the word I spoke to you. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecute me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will also keep yours. But they will do all these things to you on account of my name, because they don't know the one who sent me. Now we're going to talk about persecution, and that's probably a word you've heard the word persecution before. You're kind of familiar with it, but maybe you don't fully know what it is. So I did what pastors like to do. I went and grabbed a dictionary, and I'm going to tell you a definition because we like to define words for you guys. So persecution, by the dictionary, is any hostility towards a person or a group that happens based on your political or religious beliefs, based on your race, your religion, or your nationality. Essentially, it's any hostility that happens to a person based on something you are or something you believe. There's an organization referred to as Open Doors USA. Open Doors has existed for quite a long time, and what they do, they're a group of Christians that are very for the persecuted church. They're in over 60 countries throughout the world making some levels of impact. And they defined Christian persecution. And they defined it as any hostility that happens to a person based on their identification in Jesus. So basically anything that happens that is hostile towards a believer, that's persecution. And it's a solid definition, but honestly, it's such an open-ended definition that it leaves room for us to get ourselves in trouble, let's be honest. Because you could just throw it out there and go, well, that's persecution because I'm a Christian. And maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit and maybe get some clarity as to what this persecution is and isn't. Now, Jesus himself, he looks at his believers, his followers, and he goes, hey guys, they persecute me. Hey guys, they hate me. He said, they hate me because of what I teach. He said, they hate me, and Jesus, he knew what it was to be hated. Like, yeah, we hear about all the crowds of people that followed Jesus because they thought he was telling the truth, or they thought they might get healed if he kind of laid hands in their direction. Like, there were a ton of people that were on board with Jesus. But there were probably equal, if not greater numbers of people who weren't on board with him. People who they couldn't get behind him. A lot of them would come if they heard Jesus was nearby. They'd go with all these preconceived ideas of who Jesus was and what he was talking about. And so they'd go and they hated him before he ever spoke a word. He experienced hate and persecution simply based on the truth he taught. Steve, I'm going to switch mics. I think it's Ryan's. Sorry, I know it was crackling a lot. It was starting to bother me. I know it was bothering you. So Jesus experienced persecution based on what he taught as truth. And what he taught was truth was statements like, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. And people didn't like to hear that. And he knew that his followers, they were going to say the same exact truth. And so he looks at him, he goes, guys, they hate me because I say these things, and they're going to hate you because you say the same things. He didn't want anybody to be caught off guard by this kind of persecution that they were going to receive. He wanted them to know what was going to happen. And you see, what persecution does is persecution proves connection. Persecution proves connection. Because if somebody persecutes you for something you believe in, you're going to probably stand up for it. But if somebody persecutes you for something that you're not sure about, you're probably just going to go, I don't know about that Jesus guy. He's a thing I do on Sundays, but I'm not really looking to feel hate because of him, so I probably just won't talk about him, or I'm not going to challenge you on this. Like, it's fine, whatever. So if you're somebody who experiences persecution for telling others that Jesus is the only way, chances are you're a believer. And so this is really that classic, there are two kinds of people in the world. All right, and so in this instance, there are two kinds of people. There are those who experience persecution because they believe in Jesus. And there are those who don't experience persecution because they don't believe in Jesus. But really the cool thing about it is Jesus leaves plenty of room for us to know that people who aren't experiencing persecution because they don't believe in Jesus can easily find themselves believing in Jesus. The Apostle Paul is probably the greatest representation of that. I mean, he was literally the persecutor of the church. Like, Christians died because of Paul. But then he became a believer and probably spread the gospel more than anyone ever has short of Jesus. And so people can come and become believers even if they were persecutors of the church. Now, I want to give you some tangible things of what persecution looks like. I'm going to give you some tangible ways to know what persecution is. And so I'm going to show you some numbers. And these numbers, they come from October of 2017 until November of 2018. So it's a year's worth of statistics of what persecution looks like. Because around the world, there is hostility towards Christians. Around the world, there's all this different hostility. People are being raped, murdered, killed for their faith. And so in 2018, 1,266 churches or Christian buildings were either attacked or burned to the ground. That's 105 buildings a month that were burned simply because Christians met there. 2,625 Christians were detained without trial and imprisoned simply for believing that Jesus is the way. That's on average 219 people a month that went to jail just for believing in Jesus. 4,136. The number of people who lost their lives because they were identified as Christians. It's on average about 345 a month. That's 11 per day. One of these rows from left to right holds 14 people. So on average, per day, only 3 of them should be left. That's Christian persecution by the numbers. And here's really the even worse part. This is only based on the top 50 countries that experience persecution. There's about 15 more countries. So these numbers are probably actually higher. That's what Christian persecution looks like in our world. And what persecution does is it provides opportunity for you to serve the church. It provides opportunity for you to serve the church. See, Open Doors USA, they have a lot of different ways that you can serve the persecuted church, whether that's through prayer, and honestly, we should be praying for the persecuted Christians around the world. I wish I could look at you and go, I pray for that every day. I don't, but I want to make it more important part of my prayer life, because brothers and sisters in Christ are literally dying for their faith. So you can pray for them. You can give. You can give directly to those families who are experiencing persecution. Maybe they've lost jobs or they've lost their homes. Or you can give towards churches that have literally been burned to the ground. You can even take and go to the front lines to let these people know, because a lot of them are so disconnected from the world that they may not know there are that many believers out there. And you could go to the front lines just to be there to say, hey, there are people who are for you and believe the same thing you believe, and we believe it is worth it. But here's the truth. Like, for us, the reality for us is that we have these numbers, and you just heard them, and especially like that 11 Christians per day, like that's huge. You may not remember that number come tomorrow there. And it's simply because we don't fully comprehend this. We don't fully relate to this kind of persecution, because that's not what we experience in the U.S. That's just not what persecution looks like for us. But there is Christian persecution in the States. That is still a thing. And instead of real tangible facts, I can just tell you some of what it looks like. See, maybe take a college university. Most college universities, like major universities, if you're a very outspoken Christian, chances are you'll be ridiculed for your faith, maybe demeaned, kicked out of some social groups, some social settings where people just don't want you there. They'll pretty much call you dumb for it. And that's not just from your social peers. Like, that could potentially even happen from some of your professors who are unwilling to listen to you and who just think you're a bumpkin because you believe in Jesus. There's also the issue of some of our religious liberties that are starting to be called into question a little bit, like traditional views on marriage and traditional Christian morals. There's influence in our country that feels like it's starting to lessen, where it feels like Christians aren't as engaged in what leads our country and what direction our country is going. You know, we could chase all kinds of rabbits for this. Like, this is the issue, or maybe it was this over here, and it was really at this time when this group did this thing. Like, you can chase plenty of rabbits to figure out why these different things kind of exist, but they all boil down to just one thing. There's sin. Sin's the issue. Sin is the issue because at our core, every single person in our DNA, there's sin. Even believers who have the Holy Spirit living in them, who is there to help encourage us not to sin, we still give in. We still give in to those desires to sin. Sin is really our issue. And a lot of times when you hear that, our response is to go, you know, sin is an issue, very much. And so what we can do to help sin, not just with us, but like with our whole country, like, we'll pass some legislation, some laws, we'll make some rules to go, hey guys, like, we know what's sinful and we're trying to prevent you from sinning. And so here are some rules that will help you not sin. But I'm going to challenge that mindset a little bit. I'm going to challenge it with this statement. You cannot legislate someone's morals. You cannot legislate somebody's morals. I say that for 2 reasons. The first one is God did it. The entire Old Testament, like, it's full of God's laws. He goes, here's some law, guys. You follow this, you'll be sinless and upright people. You'll be sinless and upright people. All you got to do is follow these laws. Nobody managed it. Nobody could handle it. Like David, King David, we refer to him as the man after God's own heart. Unpopular opinion, he raped Bathsheba. And that's the guy who's a man after God's own heart. The nation of Israel, they're in the desert wandering around. They were literally following a pillar of fire. Like, imagine what a pillar of fire looks like. I don't know. It's hard to imagine. Like, outside of a rock concert, pillar of fire, like, that's all I got. But this is a pillar of fire big enough that, like, give or take about 1 million people in a desert could look and go, hey, there's the pillar of fire. We need to go that way. Like, those guys God is present right there. And they couldn't follow his laws. Second reason I think you can't legislate somebody's morals is because when you start making laws based on your morals and your beliefs, it becomes really easy to persecute those who don't follow your morals and your beliefs. It becomes really easy to persecute anyone who disagrees with you. And instead of being the persecuted church, we become the church that persecutes. And that's not what we're called to be. The Apostle Paul wrote about something similar to this in 1 Corinthians 5, verse 12. And he said, what business is it of mine to judge outsiders? AKA, what business is it of mine to judge those who are not believers? He said, don't you judge those who are inside? AKA, if other believers are having moral issues, let's have conversations. Grace-filled, but let's have conversations. God will judge those who are outside the faith. It's not our mission to legislate morals. It's not our mission to make sure everybody is following Christian morals. That's not the mission. So what is the mission? Well, Matthew 28:19 tells us. It's go, make disciples, baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them all that I command you. See, there's an order. You go. You go wherever it is you feel called to go, whether that's your house, your job, down the street, or Antarctica. Wherever you feel called to go, you go. You make disciples. How do you do that? By introducing people to Jesus, and Jesus supremely. And once they believe, you baptize them, because that is the next step of showing their faith to the world around them. And then the last thing you do, you teach them the commands and morals. See, morals are a secondary issue. Jesus is the mission. If we're focused on morals, we've missed the mission that Jesus wants us to proclaim. Because Jesus isn't about all of this. See, Jesus did something in the Gospels that I didn't always fully get. Like, I could tell he was doing a thing, but I didn't always understand it. Like, when people would ask him political questions like, hey, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Because, he's not really our king. He worships foreign gods and everything, but, like, should we pay him taxes? And everybody's looking for a chance to catch him in politics, because that's what politics does. But instead, Jesus would always take these issues and he'd shift them. He'd refocus them a little bit towards a social issue or a heart issue. And instead, he would focus on something else. And he explains why he does that in John 18. He says, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I wouldn't be handed over to the Jews. Don't read Jews, read people with power. It said, my servants would fight so that I wouldn't be handed over to those people with power. But as it is, my kingdom's not from here. Jesus looks at the world and goes, this world's laws is not my mission. That's not where I'm focused. Jesus' focus is on heaven. It's on eternity. Jesus' mission is that no one would be eternally separated from him, but would instead be eternally with him. And how does he do that? By people believing in him. That's the mission. See, what politics typically does is it creates us versus them. Have you ever watched the news? Have you watched any news ever? Grab two TVs, sit them side by side, turn on CNN and Fox and let them talk about the same thing. You wouldn't know it's the same thing. And you know why? It's because they're busy bashing the other side. It's always us versus them. It's always liberals versus conservatives. It's Republicans versus Democrats. It's left versus right, red versus blue, this issue versus that issue. Politics always wants to know what you're against. And what happens as believers, if we get too engaged in that world, we get wrapped up. It doesn't matter which side you're on. You get wrapped up and you get identified with a certain issue. You get identified with a certain people. And once you're identified with them, you're against the others who don't believe that. You're against the ones who don't want that. You become against people. Believers, we're not meant to be against people. We're not meant to be known by what we're against. The only thing you should ever be known for being against is sin separating people from God. Like, that's it. Other than that, we're for people. Our burden is for people knowing Jesus. That's our mission. That is our goal. That is the thing we are looking for above all else. But instead of being known for that, we're known as the people with signs. We're the people that make cardboard signs. And we write things like, God hates you on it. Burn in hell. Outside of the Bible Belt especially, that's how people see us. We're the ones standing outside the parade saying God hates you. We're the ones outside the abortion clinic yelling, you're a sinner. That's how the world sees us. But that's not who we're meant to be. We're meant to be a bit more like these people in this picture here. See, this is a pride parade that's happening in the Philippines. And this group of people standing here holding signs, that's a church. And this church came to this pride parade with signs that say, I'm sorry. We're here to apologize the way we as Christians have harmed the LGBT community. I love the guy over here that just wants to know, like, can we hug you just so you clearly understand, like, we are not against you. We have been identified as being against you. There have been so many of us that have let you know no, we are not supposed to be against you. We are for you. It doesn't matter what side you're on. It doesn't matter what sin you struggle with. We're for you. The girl who took this photo, she's a 19-year-old girl who was a part of the LGBTQ community. And she tweeted this. She said, I literally cried when I saw this. I cried. Imagine living in a society with nothing but love and respect for each other. We are meant to be the persecuted church. We're not meant to be the church that persecutes. We're meant to look at people who have these exact opposite views of what we know God said is true, and we lean in and go, hey, we love you. We love you. You can love somebody and not agree with them. You can have complete opposite views as somebody and still love them and care about them. It's what Jesus does. It's who we're called to be. Persecution proves connection. It provides opportunity to serve the church. And persecution propels the mission. Persecution propels the mission forward. Look, you can be political if you want to be. You can be political. You can vote. You should vote your morals. You can run for office if you feel called to run for an office. But that's not the mission. See, what the mission actually does, what happens is we're teaching Jesus and nothing else. And as we teach Jesus, people will begin to probably persecute you because they don't believe Jesus is right. They don't believe he's the truth. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you an opportunity. You're going to make one of two choices. You're going to either say it's worth it or it's not. And if you lean in and go, you know what, Jesus is worth this kind of persecution, chances are you're not just going to sit there with this like mid-level, I'm in kind of average thing. No, you experience persecution and you still feel Jesus is worth it, you're going to double down. And it is going to propel the mission forward. That is what happens in the book of Acts. When persecution happens, it took this little thing that was happening in this one country and it spread it across the world. Persecution propels the mission forward because we double down because we know Jesus and nothing else is worth it. Jesus is what is worth it because the mission of Jesus is worth it because it's all about eternity. When I first started working here, I sat down with our lead pastor, Bryant, to have a conversation about our follow-up process. Anytime somebody wants to take a next step. And basically by next step, we mean you're interested in a relationship with Jesus, you want to be baptized, join a group, serve on a team, anything. And pretty much the question was, hey, is what we're doing working well? And is there anything we should be doing better? And for me, I felt like this was a 2-minute conversation to go, I think we're doing a good job. Thanks, Bryant. And I walk out of his office. That's how that conversation is going to go. So 20 minutes later, into this conversation, he looks at me and he goes, I know we just got into the weeds of this. So, but when I think about this, all I can think is eternities are on the line. And I don't want anybody to miss it because I didn't do my job. That is what runs through my head almost daily now. Is what drives me to do what I do. Eternities are on the line, and I don't want anybody to miss it because I didn't do my job. In the last year, we've had a couple of couples join the exchange, start coming, whether through some invites of friends or families. And one of the things we kind of identify pretty early with couples is whether or not they're married, and if they're not married, are they living together? And we look into those things a little bit just because we want to know where everybody is in life. And so we had a couple of couples come that we've said, pretty sure they're living together, not married. And so what we did was we yelled at them and told them they needed to get married and get it right. It's not what we did. It's never what we do. We just loved them like everybody else. We just invited them into community like everybody else. Two of those guys in these relationships within the last several months have told us, whether one of our staff directly or one of these guys actually reached out to his life group just to lean in and go, hey guys, we talked about it and we know that we're not doing this relationship right. And so we want to get it right. We're going to get married. And not only do we want to get it right and get it married, the guys started sleeping on the couch because they knew that was where they were meant to be because they wanted to get this relationship right. It wasn't because anyone leaned in to go, hey, you're a dirty, rotten sinner. Get it right. It's just because we loved on them and told them Jesus. Jesus, Jesus. All the other stuff's secondary. It's Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Pastor by the name of Craig Rochelle has this saying he says pretty often, it's we'll do anything short of sin to reach those who haven't been reached by Christ. We'll do anything short of sin to reach those who haven't been reached by Christ. If loving on somebody who has completely opposite views than me means there's even an opportunity, even a chance that they might experience Jesus, that's worth it. If having to go and understand somebody's perspective that I've never experienced before in my entire life means there's a chance that they might experience Jesus, it is so worth it. So believers, here's my challenge for you. Be persecuted for Jesus and nothing else. Be persecuted because you taught Jesus and nothing else. Be persecuted and don't be the one who persecutes those who don't believe what you believe.